If you're just joining us, here's where we left off. Renae had spent 12 years pouring everything she had into her husband Terrence's real estate career. Her mother's life insurance money, her grandmother's wedding ring, years of being quietly erased from the very success she funded. On the night he announced their divorce in front of a room full of investors, standing inside the restaurant space she built with her own hands, an old grocer named Mr. Yoon finally revealed a secret her late grandmother had kept for 20 years. A 35% ownership stake in the very building Terrence had just signed a 10-year lease on. A stake that meant his deal could not legally move forward without Renae's signature. Now, here's what happened next. Renae didn't call Terrence. She didn't call Simone. She called a property attorney named Diane Rourke, a woman Mr. Yoon had worked with for over a decade managing the trust, and asked for a meeting as soon as possible. Diane reviewed the documents within 2 days and confirmed everything Mr. Yoon had told her. The 35% stake was real, properly filed, and fully enforceable under the original 1984 ownership agreement, which required sign-off from any owner holding more than 30% before a lease exceeding 5 years could be executed. Terrence's 10-year lease, announced publicly with cameras rolling, had been signed without anyone on his side realizing there was a second name that mattered. "He's going to find out eventually," Diane told her. "The building management will have to notify all owners of record before anything moves forward. The question isn't if he finds out, it's how you want him to find out." Renae sat with that question for 3 full days. She thought about the easy version, a quiet letter from a lawyer, a private conversation, something that would resolve the matter without spectacle. She thought about the version her grandmother might have wanted, the one where the same room that watched her get erased would watch the truth arrive in full view. She thought about the plate of food left cold in the trash, the ring she never bought back, the magazine profile that credited a stranger's vision for a room she designed board by board. On the 4th day, she called the building's management company and asked them to schedule the official ownership disclosure meeting to coincide with Terrence's next public event, a press conference he had already announced to formally introduce Coleman Realty Group's new headquarters to local media. 2 weeks later, the restaurant space filled again, this time with television cameras from 2 local news stations, a handful of real estate trade reporters, and the same city council member who had stood beside Terrence at the divorce announcement, now standing beside him again for what was supposed to be his biggest professional milestone yet. Terrence wore a new suit, deep navy, tailored close, the kind of suit a man wears when he believes the room already belongs to him. Simone stood at his side in a cream-colored dress, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the way it hadn't quite dared to at the first event, now confident enough to claim the space publicly. 10 years ago, I didn't have a business card that meant anything, Terrence said into the microphone, echoing almost the exact words he'd used at the divorce announcement, as if he had a single speech he simply updated for every occasion. Today, we're proud to call this address home for the next decade, the future headquarters of Coleman Realty Group. Applause rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Then the property manager, a composed woman named Angela Ruiz, who had worked with the building's ownership group for years, stepped forward with a manila folder of her own. "Before we move forward with today's announcement," Angela said, her voice calm and procedural, the voice of someone who had done this exact kind of thing many times before. "I need to formally introduce the building's confirmed ownership group, as required before any lease of this length can be executed." Terrence's smile stayed in place, uncertain now, the way a smile stays in place on a face that hasn't yet caught up to what it's hearing. "As many of you may not know," Angela continued, "this block has been under partial family ownership since 1984, held in trust for 2 decades, and recently transferred to its rightful beneficiary." The doors at the back of the room opened. Renae walked in. She wore a simple charcoal dress, no jewelry beyond a small pair of gold earrings that had belonged to her mother, her posture straight, her expression unreadable in the particular way that unsettles people more than anger ever could. Terrence's glass, half raised toward another round of applause, stopped moving. Simone's hand slipped slightly off his arm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Angela said, "please welcome Ms. Renae Whitfield, holder of a 35% ownership stake in this property, and, as of this morning, the deciding signature on any lease agreement exceeding 5 years." A murmur moved through the crowd, reporters glancing at each other, one already lifting a phone to start recording something other than the prepared remarks. Terrence stared at Renae across the room, the same room she had designed, the same floor she had stood on in an apron months earlier, while he told a crowd she wasn't built for where he was going. "Renae," he said, quiet, almost to himself. She walked forward, unhurried, stopping a few feet from the small podium. "I own 35% of this building," she said, her voice even, carrying clearly across a room that had gone completely silent. "My grandmother made sure of that before most of the people in this room were even born. I only just found out myself." She looked at Terrence directly. "Which means the 10-year lease you announced 2 weeks ago isn't valid. Not without my signature." Terrence's jaw tightened. "Renae, we can talk about this privately. There's no need to announce our divorce in front of 80 people either," she said. "But you did that here too. If you're still with us, drop a comment letting us know what you think Renae should do next, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything for both of them." The room stayed frozen for a long moment, the kind of silence reporters remember long after they've forgotten most of what actually happened at an event. Simone finally spoke, her voice sharper than she probably intended. "This is absurd. Some old paperwork from the 80s doesn't just override a signed commercial lease. It does when the paperwork was never disclosed to the leaseholder before he signed," Diane Rourke said, stepping forward from where she'd been standing quietly near the back. "Mr. Coleman's team failed to conduct a full title search before executing a 10-year agreement. That's not my client's error. That's his." A reporter near the front raised her phone higher, clearly already drafting a headline in her head. Terrence looked around the room, at the cameras, at the council member now quietly checking his own phone instead of standing at his side, at Simone's hand no longer on his arm at all. "Renae, please," he said, lower now, the practiced polish gone from his voice for the first time either of them could remember. "Can we just talk? Not here. Not like this." "We can talk," Renae said, "but the lease isn't moving forward. Not today. Not under these terms." She turned to Angela. "I won't be signing off on this agreement." A quiet sound moved through the room. Not applause exactly. Something closer to the collective exhale of people who had just watched something they wouldn't stop talking about for weeks. Terrence stood at the podium with nothing left to announce. Outside, 20 minutes later, the parking lot had mostly cleared, reporters rushing back to file their stories, the council member's car already gone. Terrence found Renae by her car, his tailored jacket now slightly wrinkled, his composure finally catching up to the moment he'd just lived through. "I didn't know," he said, "about any of it, the building, your grandmother, all of it. I swear to you I didn't know." "I believe you," Renae said. "That's actually the saddest part." He looked at her, confused. "You built a whole career standing on things I gave you," she said, "and you never once thought to ask where any of it actually came from. Not the money, not the ring, not this building. You just took it and kept moving, because moving forward was easier than looking back at who was underneath you." "I loved you," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word, the first honest thing he'd said all day. "I know you did once," Renae said, "but somewhere along the way you decided that loving me and being embarrassed by me could exist in the same sentence, and you chose the embarrassment every single time it mattered." He had no answer for that. "I sold my grandmother's wedding ring for you," she said, quiet now, the anger gone from her voice, replaced by something more final. The one my grandfather bought with his first paycheck home from the war. I never told you what it was, because I didn't need you to know what I was giving up. I just needed you to succeed. Terrence closed his eyes. And when you finally did, she continued, you stood in a room I built and told everyone I wasn't part of where you were going. You were standing on my mother's money in a suit you couldn't have afforded without it. And you called me the thing you were leaving behind. Renae, there's no negotiation here, Terrence, she said, cutting him off gently but completely. There's no version of this where I keep you on, or restructure something, or find a way to make this work out for both of us. I'm not interested in being generous with you. I already was, for 12 years. That was enough. She got into her car. He stood in the parking lot and watched her drive away, the same way she had once watched him disappear back through glass office doors, while she stood outside holding a container of food he wouldn't eat. The story didn't end there, not for either of them. Within a month, 2 other investors from Simone's firm came forward publicly, alleging she had misrepresented her portfolio and closing history to secure their capital for deals that had never actually materialized. A brief item ran in a local business paper about an ongoing investigation into her firm's practices. She left the state before the piece was even published, and no one in that industry circle seemed particularly surprised or particularly sorry to see her go. Terrence's headquarters deal collapsed entirely once word spread through local business circles about how the announcement had unfolded, and 2 of his existing clients quietly moved their listings to other agents within weeks. He kept his license and rebuilt slowly, in a smaller office across town, the kind of comeback that happens quietly, without cameras, without press conferences, the kind reserved for people learning what it actually costs to build something on their own for once. Renae took over the restaurant space herself, this time with her name on the lease, and nobody else's story attached to it. She reopened it 8 months later under the name Odessa's, after her grandmother, serving the same recipes she'd once sold off a folding table, now plated on real dishware, in a room she had designed and now fully owned. She hired 3 women from the neighborhood who had recently aged out of the foster system with nowhere stable to land, gave them real positions with real training, not charity, work. Using a portion of the building's income, she and Mr. Yoon established a small business grant specifically for Black women entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, the kind of support neither of them had access to when they were starting out, distributed quietly, without press releases, the same way her grandmother had once quietly held onto a piece of this block for 20 years without ever needing anyone to know. On opening night, Mr. Yoon sat at the counter with a cup of tea, watching Renae move through the dining room checking on tables, and when she finally sat down across from him for the first time all evening, he simply said, "Your grandmother would recognize this place." "I hope so," Renae said. "She would," he said. "Not because of the building, because of you. The people who feed you when you have nothing rarely need you to remember them out loud, but the ground you're standing on always remembers who paid for it." Renae didn't become strong the night she walked into that press conference. She was already strong 12 years earlier, handing over money she couldn't really spare to a man who promised to remember it, and she stayed strong through every quiet erasure that followed, long before anyone in that room knew her name was on the deed. The lesson here isn't that patience always pays off in dramatic fashion, with cameras rolling and headlines written the next morning. The lesson is that the people who quietly fund your beginning, who hand you what they can't really afford to give, who stay in the background while you take the credit, are rarely as small as you've convinced yourself they are. Be careful who you decide has nothing left to lose. Be careful whose sacrifice you mistake for weakness, and never assume that the person standing quietly behind you doesn't already own the ground you're standing on. Thank you so much for staying with Renae's story all the way through both parts. If this one hit you the way it hit us, tell us in the comments which moment stayed with you the most. If you haven't already, Subscribe to Mind Tales so you don't miss the next story like this one, and give this video a like before you go. It truly helps more people find these stories. We'll see you in the next one.